guys are unusually well behaved this morning. I'm used to more.
That's because the boss ain't here.
Rowdy this way. While the cat's away, I thought the mice played.
No.
But,
We're not playful today.
welcome back, John Parnell, to tell us about Lamentations, and ominously, that begins on page 666. I don't know what to make of that. But John can fill us in as we get underway. I looked through this. The only thing that jumped out at me that was really time sensitive about it, David, aren't you in charge of the Titanic?
I'm not in charge of it, but it's.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of responsibility to put on one person, isn't it? No, the Titanic
I
exhibit.
was trying to learn the violin, but, you know. That'll be the last one on the book. Yeah, it's on the 20th at 10 a.m. They're gonna arrive at Pepper Square, which is not too far from here, north. There's a place on Wilshire.org to look at it. Admission cost is $22.
And it's not too late to sign up.
I think you're kind of on your own as far as
Okay.
signing up.
Okay.
But, because we're gonna meet there and not take a bus or
That
something.
makes sense. Okay.
But it's supposed to be spectacular. Heard lots of good things about it.
Patty and I saw it with our nieces, and it was a good time. It's a very 360 view. They show how it was built. They talk about living in the neighborhoods where the ship was being built, and
All the racket.
the human cost. People, died building the ship, and it was very thorough.
Wow.
It was a good exhibit. So
They have a list of all their names that went down.
yeah, and
Well,
the
and
ones
they
that
give-
survived.
Yeah, they give you a card as you go in
Yeah.
Oh,
of a
and you're that
passenger.
person.
And so then at the end, there's a list and you can see if you survived or you didn't.
I was the richest man on the Titanic,
All right.
but I did not survive. So it was give and take. So,
Went down with the ship.
yeah, I did. So okay. Well,
Wednesday night's a good topic.
Wednesday
Wednesday night, we are having Pastors for Texas Children for an important discussion about school vouchers in the current Texas legislative session. So it's Greek dinner and then learn about vouchers.
Yeah, that's Wednesday night live on page 11.
Yeah, at 5.
So, anything else anybody wanted to call out that I may have overlooked?
Darren doing John Prine next.
Darren's always good. You should always listen to Darren in the chat. Okay, well, Bert, would you mind getting the prayer list started? And speaking of starting, I will turn it over to John, and he can get started on Lamentations.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning. Yeah. Not quite your usual crowd, but I'm coming off spring break, so I understand what you're here. But I'm also still trying to get used to the time change. I know it's been an entire week, but still a little odd. But alas, routines will set. All right. So, my first few questions might seem a little odd, but I'm just curious, right? And you don't have to say what it is. I'm just curious. Do any of you have a favorite passage or two of Scripture, or a favorite part of Scripture, like a book or something? Okay? Does that ring true for lots of people, right? There's something that we hold on to, a few verses here and there. Okay. How many of you have your favorite verses from Lamentations? Okay. How many of you saw the schedule and thought, fantastic, it's been a long time since I've had a good study of Lamentations? Okay. Okay, do any of you ever remember reading Lamentations? Okay. No, all right. Okay. Because it's something that we tend to skip or not really pay attention to. But it's here, right? It's included in Scripture. Stories, I tend to think of the Old Testament, we need the stories of the people of God because they're still relevant. Okay, obviously the situations have changed, but we're human and we do many of the same things, right? Interacting with the same God. So why is it, do you think, that we don't often pay attention to Lamentations? What turns you off?
The title.
What's wrong with the title?
There's enough bad news
Yeah.
about spending it on Sunday.
It's not cheery.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of bad things that happen in life, a lot of bad, right? And is that part of being human?
Yep.
I mean, we have to acknowledge that there is suffering. Okay, and this is coming out of a specific instance of that. And I realize that in the 21st century United States, you know, just be comfortable, be happy, right? You can buy something to make you content, or find something, right? We need to understand that suffering, bad times are actually part of life, and lamenting is a part of being human. Okay? I realize, you know, if I were naming it, right, being my sarcastic self, it would be like weeping and wailing. Yeah, that would turn us off, right? We don't want to pay attention to that, to lamenting. But it happens. It happens to big groups of people. It happens to the people of God. It can happen to us as a church community. It can happen to me as an individual. And I realize it's titled, okay, to me these are two separate things, right? Dormancy and the absence of God. But the issue is sometimes maybe we have a dormant relationship with God because we think God is absent. Man, I'm going through something that I don't think God is here, right? But we know better, right? But we're human, and so we go through phases. It's not like, okay, now I realize you might disagree, but it seems to me that no human can say, man, every day, all 365 for the last several decades, I've just been right on the top of the mountain with God every single moment, right? It's been a joyous experience every second of every day. Is that being human? Not really. So we have to acknowledge, right, that there are downtimes, right? And the thing is, like, at funerals or memorials, right, are there poems of grief? Do we have songs that express grief, right, over missing something or over pain, right? I realize we could turn on some tunes and have a really simplistic view of going through things, but it's part of being human, okay? And that's what Lamentations is, okay? And so, go ahead.
Why is it then that when we have something like happen like that, we say, God, why did, you know, either swear or in some way blame God that for our lamentation?
Because I think that's a temptation for us as humans. Okay, now what we're going to read here, okay, and by the way, I realize once upon a time Jeremiah was considered to be the author. That's no longer the case. And Lamentations is actually 5 separate poems, right? We'll break down the structure in a second. But they're going to have a specific interpretation of why these things are happening, right? And they see God as a punisher, but not God at fault, okay? But we do, right? And so, you know, and for those of you who like a lot of the Psalms, some of the Psalms, right on. One of my favorite passages that I keep returning to over the many years is from Psalms. But some of the Psalms are just crying out. Why is this going on? God, where are you? Why is this happening? Because that's part of being human, right? We feel alone. And this can happen to lots of us. And this is a community-oriented thing here in Lamentations, but again, it can happen to us as individuals. Like several years ago, you know, I started 1 year in the hospital. A dog died a few weeks later. The next year my wife left. The next year my last dog died, and then COVID hit. So I was not having a happy time, right? It was a period, right, where I was like, why, right? What am I doing wrong? And we have to hold on to, right, God doesn't say, hey, everything is going to be fantastic, because we have a human experience. The only thing that God promises is, I will be there. I am there. Okay? And there are times when I want something a little bit more tangible, admittedly. But we do have down times. It's not like we're consistent all the time. Okay. But this is the people of Judah dealing with a situation that their nation has been attacked. Many of them have been carried away in captivity and slavery, and their city of Jerusalem has largely been destroyed. Okay, so this, I'm hoping this is something that you and I have not dealt with. Okay, but can you imagine, for those of you who really like Dallas, right, can you imagine if somebody attacks us, I don't know which Russians or Chinese is possible, that at this point, to have somebody a lot more powerful than we are, it would have to be an alien civilization coming from elsewhere in the galaxy. But can you imagine many people being taken away in captivity and your city being laid to waste?
No.
Okay, would that be a time of lament? Like, but what has happened to our city? Okay, would you wonder, God, where are you? Okay, and I actually deal with that question from students. Like this semester I'm teaching a Holocaust class, and we studied the history of anti-Semitism, and the students are shocked by how deeply ingrained into the history of Christianity anti-Semitism really is. But then, right, we're about to study the actual war and the construction of the death camps and what happened there, right? And the legitimate question is going to be, where was God? Okay, for the people, right, who were the chosen, right, at least in the Old Testament context, what's going on? Okay, so there are some questions, all right? And the thing is, experiencing pain is being human. Okay, and we need to let that out. Whether it's our own city, our own nation falls, whatever the case may be. But this is in the 6th century BCE, Babylon, the Babylonian Empire has wiped out the last kingdom of the Hebrews and basically destroyed Jerusalem. Okay, so yeah, not a happy time. Okay, now, before we get into some of the verses, let's turn to chapter 1, because we're going to understand a little bit about the structure of these poems. Because these poems are using what was already an established structure for, well, a dirge or a lament. Okay, so, looking at chapter 1, how many verses are there?
22.
Okay, looking at chapter 2, how many verses are there?
22.
22. Now, we don't get this in English translations, but the way it was set up using Hebrew, those 22 stanzas, each stanza started with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And there are, how many of them?
22.
22. Okay, now, why do you think a poet would use that structure, especially in the context of Lamentations? Why start everything with every letter of the alphabet?
Make it easy to remember.
Okay, maybe make it easy to remember. Symbolically, what could it represent?
Completeness.
Yeah, like this is the totality
Yeah,
of our
A to Z.
experience.
We say A to Z,
Yeah.
whatever they would wear.
If we cover it A to Z, is that a promise?
Yeah.
It's like the first time I went to London. You have to buy your little map guide, A to Z, because it covers everything. Right, all the street names, okay? So that's the way it's set up. Okay, now, there is one that's set up differently. Chapter 3, how many verses does it have?
3 times 22.
Okay, wow, we have mathematicians even. So 66. Okay, now looking at chapter 3 and chapter 2, are the verses of different lengths?
Yes.
Okay, do you see how you had like 3 lines for a verse, right, in 3 lines? Well, what chapter 3 does, it actually does it 3 times. Every single line starts with a different letter of the alphabet and it goes in order, and then it starts over and goes in order, and then it starts over and goes in order. So it's not necessarily longer, but it's just structured differently. Okay, and again, using some already existing patterns for this kind of literature. But symbolically, it could be like this is our experience. Yes?
So I have a question. If they broke up 3 the way they did, Do they go through the alphabet 3 times? Okay.
Yeah, because you have your 22, but that's why they're shorter. Because instead of doing the one letter of the alphabet and this much, you're only doing the one letter alphabet, they go.
Well, I was just wondering if it was the editor's choice to turn it into 66 rather than 22. But it sounds
Well,
like they were kind of
okay.
compelled to.
Whenever we turn to the Bible and see verses, yeah, that's a decision made much later
Right,
in life.
right.
But the stanzas are there.
And there was a logic
Right,
behind
and
it.
the, what we might call an acrostic with the letters in order, right, was already there, right, so that structure is there.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Now, one thing we have to understand, and I don't think this is something that we still do today. Okay, so they've been taken over, cities in ruins, many of their people are in slavery, and they don't look at God and say, oh, you're just being mean. Okay, whom do you think they blame in this interpretation? Why have these things happened?
Because they've sinned.
Because they've sinned. Okay, and again, in 2025, I'm not sure that that's how we look at the world. That bad things happen because of sin, or these things happen to me. I mean, we accept that bad things are happening, but we need to understand the perspective. These folks are writing, it's their own sin. And not, hey, you had a bad day today, and boom, something really bad happened, but like sin over generations. The people of Israel who were called, they've strayed away from God, whether with idols, not caring for the poor, right, being selfish and greedy, whatever the case may be. But we need to understand that they're interpreting it from their sins have led to this. Of course, they had to be destroyed to reach that level of understanding. Obviously, they weren't paying attention. Okay, but before we get to the verses, do you think there are times when God actually gets your attention through something that happens? Okay, if people were carried away in slavery and your city was destroyed, would that perhaps be an attention-getting moment? Right, so that's what's going on. Okay, but as many of you have predicted, sad things. So, let's get in to some of the scripture. All right, and we're going to start with chapter 1 and come forward, and then we're going to go back with a different strand. But right now, we're going to look at, wow, things are bad. And I know we don't like to do that. Okay. So in chapter 1, could someone read verses 1 through 5?
How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all taken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate, her priests groan, her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become the masters, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has made her suffer for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe.
So how would you describe the mood at the beginning of this first poem?
Pretty bleak.
Does it seem somber? And bleak? Right? No one comes to the festivals. This seems relevant to me because just last night I was trying to drive through a St. Patrick's Festival to get to where I was going. And we have those things, right? But no one's coming. Now, her gates are desolate. We don't really have gates to the city. But that's like, okay, that might be, well, the highways are in ruin, right? The roads. Her children have gone away, so the young people have been captured for slavery. take the physically fit, right, the strong, right? No one's coming. Living in hard servitude, right, distress, no friends left, okay?
And they're talking about Jerusalem here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are times in Lamentations, we're not gonna make a big deal of this, but sometimes Zion actually speaks, and speaking as the personification of the city itself. Okay, a princess among the provinces has become a vassal, and a vassal means you owe service to someone else. Okay? Describing the city as a widow, right? What do you think the population, well, this is kind of tough. I was about to say the city of Dallas or the Dallas metropolitan area right now.
I think it's
Like the whole Metroplex? Isn't it 7+ million or 8?
It's 8.5 million.
Okay?
What'd you say?
8.5.
8.5?
That's the whole.
Would it be noticeable if 2 years from now there were only 500,000 people? Even if there were 2.5 million left, would that still be noticeable? Would that lead to questions?
Cheaper housing.
Well, yeah, but that's the whole thing, right? Things are left alone, right? There's no one coming,
Right.
it isn't here, but you're gonna have problems finding goods and services
I have
in
a
that
question,
situation.
it may be not important at all, but they don't mention the male pronoun till halfway through. It's all female.
Because they're referring to the city as a female.
As it is female, okay.
And sometimes we do that, like sometimes, depending on the country, we refer to it as male or female, or a city or a state. And that's just what's happening here. Okay. The city is interpreted that way. Okay? Right, so now that you're overjoyed about what starts, right? But try to imagine what this would be like. Right? Would it lead to lamentation? Yet no one's coming, right? You know, doesn't happen, our children are gone. Okay? Now, let's go to chapter 2. Okay, and this is going to make it sound like they're blaming God, and we'll have to see if we end up on that interpretation or not. Could someone just read verse 5 in chapter 2?
The Lord has become like an enemy. He has destroyed Israel. He has destroyed all its palaces, laid in ruins its strongholds, and multiplied in daughter Judah mourning and lamentation.
Okay, so what's the very first line? What does it say the Lord has become?
Like an enemy.
What could it have said? What word could be left out to change the meaning?
Like.
Okay, if it just said the Lord has become an enemy, is that different than saying the Lord has become like an enemy?
It's a lot different.
Okay, so that's important for us to understand, because then what does it say God has done? Right, destroyed all these things. Like an enemy might, but it's like an enemy. They're not describing God as an enemy, but doing things like an enemy might. Okay, and we're going to try to discover why in the interpretation here. Okay, I hope you enjoyed chapter 2. We're moving on. In chapter 3, I'm going to start with verse 16. Could someone read 16 through 18?
He has made my teeth grind on gravel and made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, gone is my glory and all that I had hoped for from the Lord.
Okay, feeling better? Okay. Have you ever had to have your teeth, like you've had something in your teeth grinding?
Sand.
Okay, now I love some strong images in poetry. Teeth grinding on gravel. Right, that's kind of like a sound you don't want to hear, texture you don't want to hear, right? But that's what's happening here. And made me cower in ashes. I realize we don't really use ashes in that way anymore. And here in Texas, we have no reason for fires in the first place, except for Ash Wednesday recently. What does it mean my soul is bereft of peace?
It's not at peace.
Oh, yeah, but bereft of peace, I think is stronger than just saying, I'm a little restless.
Totally
Maybe
missing.
anguish.
Empty, anguish,
It's totally blank, like no, there's,
okay,
It's almost like mourning the absence of peace.
okay. And okay, this is my take on it. Bereft of peace means I am on edge. I am nervous. I am upset, right? Like I can't concentrate. Does that make sense? I can't focus on something. I'm unsettled because my soul is bereft of peace. It isn't just like peace is gone, oh, I'm angry. It is, I am like physically shaken and unsettled, okay? And I realize this next line is totally not America in the 21st century. At least we wouldn't claim this. I have forgotten what happiness is. Okay, can you imagine how far along you have to be able to state with integrity, I have just completely forgotten what happiness is, that that's a possibility. Okay, and I realize there are moments when we can forget about it, but even when bad things are happening, like I might be really frustrated with something, but you know, I can have good moments with someone at a symphony concert. I can have a good moment with students, right? When an old college friend calls, right? It's not like I've forgotten those moments. I wish there were more of them, okay, potentially. But bereft of peace, so much so that I'm so unsettled, right? So on edge that I have forgotten what happiness is, okay? And part of that is my situation is so tenuous, right? Am I going to eat? Where are my family and friends? How are we going to do this? Right? Do we even have, right?
That
priests
line makes
around?
me think of Naomi in Ruth when she says, I should be called Mara, which I think, if I remember right, is bitterness.
Mhm.
Because everything's gone. Everything I loved is gone. And it sounds to me like this is the city as a whole expressing that emptiness, that loss.
Yeah. So gone is my glory and everything I'd hoped for. So bereft of peace, I've forgotten happiness, my glory is gone, which might actually be a good thing, because it's not supposed to be my glory. But everything I had hoped for from God, right, it's just, okay? So reaching this point of desolation. And again, they're in a specific example where they literally have been run over. That's tough for us to imagine. This might happen to us as a congregation. It might happen to us as individuals, right? We can recognize that in 2025, right? You know, the Syrians, Ukrainians, the Israelis, and Palestinians, right? There are a lot of people who actually are in desolate situations. Their cities literally have been destroyed, okay? And they may be expressing, they may be feeling some of these things, okay? All right, before we leave chapter 3 behind, could someone read, we're going to drop down to verse 43. This is a little bit longer passage. Could someone read 43 through 51?
You have wrapped yourself with anger and pursued us, killing without pity. You have wrapped yourself with a cloud so that no prayer can pass through. You have made us filth and rubbish among the peoples. All our enemies have opened their mouths against us. Panic and pitfall have come upon us, devastation and destruction. My eyes flow with rivers of tears because of the destruction of my people. My eyes will flow without ceasing, without respite, until the Lord from heaven looks down and sees my grief, sees my eyes cause me grief at the fate of all the young women in my city. Is that it?
Yeah. Does that sound like enough?
Yeah, that's enough.
Okay. So, talking about God, you are in anger, you have pursued us. Prayers are not getting through. You have made us filth and rubbish. Right? Panic and pitfall, right? We just said bereft of peace. Devastation, destruction. And then it gets into the eyes, right? And I don't know, well, I don't know about you, but it's actually easier for me to cry at this age than it used to be. I realize as a child I probably cried all the time, but I have no recollection of that. But crying from grief, and that's actually a way that we can vent, right? Get some of that out. But rivers of tears over the destruction. I'm grief, right? I'm upset at what's happened to the young women in my city. And that's not necessarily just in slavery, right? There's a hint of additional assaults on women in the city when soldiers take over. So again, intense grieving that makes us cry. And here the poet is saying, unceasingly. Okay? All right. Let's go to chapter 5.
Can I ask a quick historical question on that before we go away? When we were reading that, I kept getting images of the Holocaust. And in the Holocaust, Jews were very singled out. Was that true, the anti-Semitism to the farthest extreme? Was that true here as well, where I think, historically, lots of nations were sent into exile? Was Israel singled out by its enemies as the worst of the...
Okay. First, the Jews were the primary targets, but not the only targets in the Holocaust. Okay? For
Well,
sure.
that's true. Yeah.
All right?
But-
So there's several other groups targeted. Now, historically, Israel's big problem is it's on the path between the big empires. And so as a state, as an independent state, and as a time of power, its heyday was short-lived. Because it's between Egypt and Assyria and Persia and Babylon. Okay, it's like the invasion route to get to places. So they just happen to be in the way. Now, at the same time, they are different than their neighbors. It's hard to see if that's any of the motivation, but they are different in the sense that once we have Abraham move, right, and the true monotheism begins, right, the Jews are noticeably different in their beliefs than everyone else around them. Okay, and even centuries after this, right, that was true for the Romans as well. And the Romans are actually the ones who had the final destruction of Jerusalem and dispersed the Jews, and they didn't have a nation until 1948. After that, but it wasn't, oh, you're weirdos, we're coming after you. It was like, you just rebelled, we're going to crush you. That seemed to be the motivation. So I'm not sure they're being, we're the traditional enemy. It's just, they are different, but you're on the way, and if we're stronger than you, and you're not paying us tribute or whatever, we might do something, right? But they're in the path of empire, I think, politically, it seems to be more salient point. Does that make sense? All right.
It's interesting that they don't blame the Babylonians in any of this. It's all about us and you.
Oh, they're gonna have something to say about them in the end.
Okay.
And we're just not looking at those. Okay, chapter 5. Let's look at one verse. Okay, and this is going to be laying responsibility. Can someone read verse 7?
Our ancestors sinned, they are no more, and we bear their iniquities.
So what's the reason that's being given?
Sin.
Sin.
Ancestors sinned.
Yes, like generations have sinned. Okay, and we're the nation of individuals. It doesn't matter what the previous generations did. Well, yeah, it does in a way. But that's how they're interpreting it. Okay, we bear the iniquities because our community of faith has sinned. Okay, now we see that again. Let's go back into chapter 3. I'm going to start in verse 39 this time. Can someone read 39 through 42?
Why should any who draw breath complain about the punishment of their sins? Let us test and examine our ways and return to the Lord. Let us lift up our hearts as well as our hands to God in heaven. We have transgressed and rebelled, and you have not forgiven.
Okay, so, right, that one we saw in verse 5 said, oh, it's our ancestors. But right here it's saying, we have transgressed and rebelled. So we as a people, it may not be all the contemporary people, okay?
Both can be true.
Yes. But we have transgressed, okay? And why should anybody complain about the punishment? Okay, and this is totally where we disconnect. It's like, excuse me, it's bad, I get to complain. It's one of my favorite pastimes. But he's saying, who can complain about this, of our sins? Let us test and examine our ways. Okay, now that God has gotten our attention, let us examine our ways. Self-reflection, self-analysis, right? And what does it say? Return to the Lord. It may be our ancestors that had something to do with this, but we have rebelled, and we're the ones who need to return. Okay? And one of the important things is they're not saying, bad things are happening, forget it, God, I'm never going to pay attention to you again. It's more like, oops, we forgot who God is and who we are in connection. Okay? So we have to examine and return to God. All right. So we have bad things attributed to sin. We're not going to leave Lamentations without at least some hope. So we're going to have a few verses. While we're in chapter 3, could someone read 21 through 26?
But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. How far?
Through 26.
The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord.
Okay.
It's funny to me that wonderful verse 22, there's a hymn. It's funny that comes from Lamentations, isn't it?
Yeah, did you know that?
Who knew? Who knew?
Did you know that you've been singing Lamentations all those years? Yeah, but talking about mercies never ceasing, new every morning, great is your faithfulness, right? That sounds familiar. This is more what we're accustomed to, okay? But the thing is, right, we've just said, right, are these happy poems? Feel good, but at the same time, what are we told? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, even though he's the one punishing. Well, to me, even though I've never actually been a parent, but as a teacher, right, there are times when we have to discipline the students. It's not because I don't care, right? And when you discipline, right, that's not the issue, right? It's something has gone wrong. But steadfast love is there, ongoing mercies that are new every day. We discover things. In faithfulness, I will hope in God. He's good to those who wait. Now, what does it mean to wait quietly? Right, it says, it is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. What does that mean to wait quietly?
Don't complain and don't scream your concerns.
Yeah, I mean, you can be in prayer, but it shouldn't be, okay. And I realize, again, this is not the American way. We want to vent to everyone who's willing to listen for a few minutes. You can complain about that, right? But wait quietly for salvation, because what does it say? The love of God never goes away. The mercies never go away, they manifest themselves in new ways. Okay? You know this is true. So wait quietly for the salvation. Okay, now keep in mind, the context is they've been captured, destroyed, but wait quietly.
For 2,500 years.
Well, no, it's actually, well, they get restored by a different empire and they rebuild the temple. Okay?
But they don't become a nation.
Well, they do, sort of, right? It's only in the last 2,000 years. But that was
They could
different.
also be wait without anxiety,
Ah. Wait quietly, just,
'cause I don't.
yeah. I think that's true. Because if we're waiting with anxiety, we're.
Yeah. Come on, yeah.
Right, based on what we talked about before, I think that's an excellent point. All right. Staying in chapter 3, can someone read 58 through 60?
You have taken up my cause, O Lord. You have redeemed my life. You have seen the wrong done to me, O Lord. Judge my cause. You have seen all their malice, all their plots against me.
Okay, so in amongst pointing out the bad things, right, bereft of peace, happiness is gone. Now, again, these are 5 separate poems. It's not like they were written at the same time as a connected series. They're actually 5 distinct ones, okay? But the way we have Lamentations, right, with all these bad things, God has taken up my cause, redeemed, okay? And you have seen their malice and their plots against me. Now we're beginning to blame some people. And if you look at verse 64, pay them back for their deeds, O Lord, according to the work of their hands. That actually sounds like some of the Psalms, right? I trust you to deal with my enemies, right? Because we've just been instructed to wait quietly. Okay? God is the Redeemer, so let God do that. Okay? Now let's go to the end of chapter 4. And we start to get even more hope. Okay? Let's go to the last verse, and we're only going to read the first half of the last verse of 22 in chapter 4. The punishment of your iniquity, O daughter Zion, is accomplished. He will keep you in exile no longer. Okay, now this might mean spiritual exile, because the physical exile and political exile was going to last a bit. Okay, but you were, right, God is here, God is with you, okay? But again, returning to God, remembering the promises of God for love and mercy. Okay, so now let's go to the end of chapter 5, which is the end of the book. Is that what I want to do? Okay, you hang out in chapter 5. I'm going to read something quickly from chapter 3. For the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. Okay? So again, exile is ending. God's not going to reject forever. He's punishment. He's become like an enemy. But that's not going to last. He has compassion. His steadfast love, which never ceases. Okay? Right? And that's why we, in chapter 4, the exile is going to be over. And at the end of chapter 5, we have a prayer. Could someone read 19 through 22 in chapter 5?
For you, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations. Why have you forgotten us completely? Why have you forsaken us these many days? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure.
Okay. So 22 puts an if out there, unless this is true. But this actually leads us to what do we believe about God? Do we believe in the steadfast love that we've been reminded about? That there's compassion and mercy? Or do we really think, well, God, right, you've utterly rejected us. There's no hope. Okay, or do we think there is hope? But we have to acknowledge that God is God. Okay, so this prayer is there. Right, and again, it starts off, why have you forgotten us? Why have you forsaken us? Because it can seem like that. But it doesn't say, restore us to power. It doesn't say, restore the king to the throne. What does verse 21 say? What has to be restored?
Us to you.
Restore us to you. Because that's what matters. That's the important piece. Whatever's going on, and we have horrible things. We can look around the world, horrible things. We can look at our whole lot, our own lives, right? We have grief, we have pain. Things didn't turn out the way. I missed an opportunity, right? Somebody acted against me here, right? Or, maybe we have lived in a place with war and our home has been destroyed somehow, right? Restore us to you. That is the prayer, okay? And I realize 22 can throw us off, unless it's just hopeless, you're so angry. But the writer of the poem knows that that's not the case. But allowing, okay, yeah, we have sinned, so God really doesn't have to love us, okay, necessarily, and could reject, but restore us to you so that then we may be restored in our position. So again, and this is tough. When bad things are happening, we might tune out. Okay, well, that church thing. Do I need people, right? We can sort of isolate and become separate. But restore us to you. Okay, and that doesn't mean, oh, bad things are happening, oh, this is a great day with God, but knowing that God is there for us, right, with that stuff, that's love. Okay, for a community, for a congregation, for a nation, for an individual. But again, we have these Old Testament stories because these are the stories of the people of God, right? And so the down times are part of life, part of being human, and we shouldn't shy away. Oh, Lamentations, why would I read that? Okay? But again, at the end, there's an expression of it. Yeah, people have died. People have been abused. People have become slaves. But the whole point is to be restored to God with that eternal promise. All right. Other comments? Anything you want to add? Something that you've noticed? Okay, so maybe your attitude toward Lamentations won't be the same. Won't be the same. Yeah, but I guarantee if I told my own class, yeah, we're going to study Lamentations, what? All right, thanks for letting me be here.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Well, interestingly, for the second week in a row, the prayer vote is blank. So,
We've returned to God.
has our reflection on Lamentations caused anybody to rethink it? Is there anything we need to add to the prayer list for this week?
Well, I should have put it, but it's actually a phrase. One of our sons had been out of work for a few months, and he's got a job, and it's looking, and he's just thankful to hear that in his voice.
Bravo.
Any others?
Well, I actually have one. I have a cousin who was diagnosed last week with pneumonia and meningitis. Suddenly, somehow. Yeah.
Did you say pneumonia and meningitis?
Yes.
There weren't any other things that were like easier to spell?
Very sick.
Okay.
Abbreviations.
So, I did my best on that.
There you go.
Okay. All right, well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this community and the chance that we have to come together to reflect on your word. Thank you for the lesson that John brought to us this morning, a lesson that's can be hard but necessary to hear. And we thank you for the unrelenting forgiveness and love,
Yes.
even when it feels like it comes slowly, that you offer us. Lord, we are grateful to you for Kelly's son and the new job. And we offer to you in prayer Deborah's cousin, diagnosed with pneumonia and meningitis, as well as any other prayers that have not been expressed today. We know you hear them all. We offer our prayers to you in your son's name, Jesus our Lord. Amen.
Thanks, John. Are you signed up for another one this year? I think you are.
I think Diana will be there today. For Sunday. I think I have one of the songs. I mean, there's a lot to do between now and then, and so I really haven't paid close attention, but I do think I'm signed up to other.
I think you also told me once that you have to recruit someone to teach your class whenever you come.
Yes, well, May, I'm usually out anyway, but I do